Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Existential Files. And I'm hoping here on the line is Louie, Dr. Louie Savva.
That's correct. Good afternoon, Matthew.
I'm just trying to muster up, some excitement for these things because I'm rushing from meeting to meeting, and I'm always really interested in the discussions we're going to have. So today, Louie, then I gather we are joined by a guest today. Tell me more.
Another special guest. We're very lucky recently to have got some very interesting guests. Today we are joined by, I guess he's primarily now he's an author, but he's written a couple of very interesting books. One of them, which is The Strangest Man on Paul Dirac, the physicist Paul Dirac. Now, Graham, do you want to introduce yourself? Is it Farmelo?
Farmelo, yeah.
Farmelo, right. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Is that okay?
Yes. Well, I'm a renegade theoretical physicist, and in around 2000, I started writing a biography of Paul Dirac, which you just mentioned, and then I wrote after that I wrote a book about Churchill and his involvement in nuclear science. I'm now writing another book on the interplay between fundamental physics and pure mathematics.
So I mean, we're Matthew and I are both psychologists, but this podcast is kind of about human beings in the universe. And our last episode was talking to a philosopher about why the universe exists. So these are good questions, and given your background, I mean, one of the very first episodes of the podcast, I said it's the height of conceit to think that the universe hides from us. But I was reading your book on Paul Dirac, and I was kind of reminded that, before Dirac came along, there was a whole half of the universe that we really, I don't think it's an overstatement to say we didn't even have an idea it existed. Graham. So would you agree with that?
Pretty much. What Dirac really was the first person to pull open the curtain on what you might call antimatter. Now, if you go right back to the beginning of the universe, in the first moments of it, the universe consisted of half matter and half antimatter. Now we hardly see any antimatter at all, unless you count cosmic rays and going into particle accelerators and what have you. But through the mind of Paul Dirac, that's very important. There was no experiment. He in effect deduced its existence from from one of his equations on the behavior of the electron. And now antimatter is routinely made in laboratories. We detect it every single day all over the world, and we have a much clearer understanding of its behavior.
And I mean, it really is half the universe, isn't it, Graham? I mean, it basically doubled our understanding of what the universe is in a single kind of thought, almost.
Well, it did. I mean, the truly remarkable thing, as I mentioned there, was that this wasn't the classic case of an experimenter or group of experimenters suddenly seeing this strange stuff. Rather, it was Dirac deducing its existence from his equation on how an electron behaves. The electron is the first fundamental particle to be detected. And we've known that it exists since about 1897, and he sought to find a way of describing it using the two great theories of 20th century physics, which is special relativity, which is a kind of modification of our classic understanding of space-time, and quantum mechanics, which is a theory of motion of fundamental particles. And he wedded those two theories together and produced a theory of the electron that he used very brilliantly to come up with the idea that there's an anti-electron, which is a particle that has the same mass as the electron, but exactly the opposite electrical charge. We now know that every particle has an antiparticle, even neutral ones, where often they're the same particle. So he really did open up this part of the universe that we really had no idea existed. So antimatter is a big part of our thinking of the fundamental structure of the universe now.
And like you say, today, I mean, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But PET scanners use positrons.
That's right.
Every day. So hospitals around the world are using this particle that we didn't even know existed now routinely.
That's exactly right. Yeah, Dirac wasn't doing it for practical reasons, but you're quite right. The positrons now in what's called PET scanners are used in hospitals routinely to do scans that enable us to look inside the body without opening it up.
Which is, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I find that absolutely mind-blowing that we're using this part of, something that we didn't even know existed. And it isn't, I mean, not to say that X-rays aren't amazing as well, but I just think that the fact that, this whole part of the universe that we didn't even know existed, and we're using it routinely, is, I mean, am I right in thinking that Dirac died before we started using these scanners, or?
Do you know, I don't know for sure, actually. I really don't know the answer to that. But I think it's fair to say that it was very, very roughly around that time. He wouldn't have paid much attention to it. He was only interested in fundamental physics. Sure. But he wouldn't have discouraged it. He was trained as an engineer. So he would be delighted to hear about it, but it's not something that was his highest priority.
So may I ask a number of, or at least begin some what may be quite naive questions, in that, so when Louie did, Louie, I think it was in the very first podcast where you said this idea that the universe doesn't hide from us. So is then, the reason why I think you're drawn to saying, well, is actually this suggests that in fact it does, if there's essentially half the universe which we didn't know even existed, and it's only through initially these kind of thought experiments and subsequently, discovering this, absolutely, then we can challenge Louis' first statement saying, yes, there is parts of the universe here that does hide from us. I
mean, if I can just jump in before Graham answers. I mean, of course, a lot of what your book is about, Graham, is about, the strangeness of the quantum world. And again, looking into the quantum world, it's as far, again, the universe is hiding from us in a way, isn't it?
Well, it's funny. I wouldn't use the word hide. I mean, the job of it's the universe is just, well, in my view anyway, the universe is out there, ready for us to experiment on, and the ingenuity, fundamentally speaking, the ingenuity of the experimenter is to ask the right questions of nature, and if he or she or they ask the right questions, you can get a very enlightening answer. You can discover a new particle, a new phenomenon, a new effect, and so on. Now, the theoretician, they work, of course, closely very often with experimenters, but the theoretician is mainly using his or her brain. This is in human thought. This is relatively recent. In physics, the idea that people can earn their living, right, who not doing experiments, but by trying to think their way into the way in which nature works.
And therefore, we're left with those kinds of amazing people who go, actually, well, let me consider this as a possibility. And of course, eventually, there seems to be some data that supports that. But in terms of then, and again, the naive question, so we're talking about antimatter here. Now, more recently, we hear discussions about dark matter, dark energy. Is that something? I mean, are we talking in similar areas there, or are those all examples of matter, and antimatter is still different from those things again?
Well, as I said, antimatter to me, the antimatter is completely fundamental because it's the flip side of all the fundamental particles, and we know from the big theories of 20th century physics, as I said, that every fundamental particle has a counterpart antiparticle. So it's very, very fundamental. That said, you're quite right that in our search to understand the stuff that's in the universe, the two dearest quarries, if you like, of the astronomer or the experimenter, observer, whatever you want to call them, is to understand this stuff called dark energy and this stuff called dark matter that we don't know what it is. We know it should be there because we can see its effect on other particles, but we don't know what it is. And whomever discovers it is going to get a Nobel Prize for sure. I mean, it's a deep question, and we all really look forward to knowing the answer to it. But it's a big, big question in physics now.
So in which case then this idea that, so when Louie was saying, half the universe is antimatter, so that's even saying that even when you come and if someone discovers dark energy, dark matter, again, let's try to get your head around this, would that also have antimatter? I mean, if we're saying that dark energy and dark matter are over and above that, actually is only antimatter a relatively small proportion of the whole thing?
Well, it's. I think we're in danger of getting into too much deep water here. In terms of the regular matter that we know about, then the theories that I've mentioned definitely tell you that every one of those particles has a counterpart antiparticle. Now, there are candidates. In other words, there are theoretical possibilities for what that dark energy and dark matter consists of, but we don't know for sure which is right. So I would say we should hold our horses on that before pronouncing on on the exact nature of those particles.
Because things like antimatter, then, I mean, is that because dark energy and dark matter, again, this is my complete lay understanding when you're describing it here, Lou describe it, is something you can only infer. You can only infer it's there. Yes. Is that also the case of antimatter?
No, you can observe a track of antimatter directly. You can actually see it in a detector. You've got the biggest ones, I guess, out at CERN in Geneva, and you can actually see the tracks left by anti-electrons, anti-muons, and so on. You can see them moving across the chamber. I mean, they move. They go at a hell of a lick, pretty close to the speed of light, but you could see them, right? I suppose you could argue that you see those effects on other matter. That's true, but you could definitely see the path they take. But with antimatter, with dark energy and dark matter, and I want to stress that this is not particularly about Dirac. He made no contribution to these things at all. But with dark energy and dark matter, we basically want, we're at a fairly rudimentary stage in our understanding of them.
So I don't feel so bad there if I know even less than that and know nothing about it. So Louie, you seem to be quite fascinated by Dirac himself, because he himself wasn't obviously he was looking at some very strange things in the strangeness of the universe. But as an individual himself, you were obviously interested in some aspects of that. I
mean, Graham, I really don't like being a sycophant, but I absolutely loved your book. It was absolutely brilliant, And I mean, I think the story of the physicists who are, in the last century, who were basically, investigating, quantum theory, and I find quantum theory to be absolutely fascinating. I think it's a story that it just is so compelling. These different characters, Heisenberg and Dirac, for example. I mean, I thought you did a wonderful job of telling us his human story and answering the questions. I mean, I was reading, and I was going, because I mean, I'm an atheist, so for me, I want to know what these people think, and again, it was interesting that you were telling me, and I don't think I'm wrong to say that Dirac, at least early on in his life, was an atheist. Was he not?
I think again, we could spend an hour talking about the meaning of these words, but sure. I would say that in his 20s, he would be counted as an atheist if the meaning of that term is someone who denies or says extremely unlikely that there exists some kind of superior being. Sure. And I think he more or less stuck with that. But he did flirt with the idea of God in a Spinozian way, being identified with the uniformity of nature, rather as Einstein did.
And which is a funny. I mean, I always say, because I mean, as an atheist myself, I find, and I'm fascinated by mathematics and physics, but I have no mathematical aptitude whatsoever. I mean, I can barely count. And I do find this idea of beauty something that's interesting. I don't know if you can talk about that at all, Graham, because for me, I wonder, again, naively, like Matthew says, for me, why is the Dirac equation beautiful?
Mhm. Well, of course, we, as you say, not everyone has a grasp or knowledge of mathematics, in particular higher mathematics. So we have to talk here, I think, in terms of analogy. Now, let me just put it this way. You can imagine, for just for argument's sake, a piece of furniture that I might knock up in my garden shed here, and it would basically hang together with lots of bits stuck on here and there, and it would just about do its job, but be be very inelegant, asymmetric, have various parts stuck on to make it work and what have you. And most people would look at that piece of furniture with my very bad craftsmanship and say it was a pretty ugly device. And if you go to a Charles René Mackintosh, for example, or the work of a great furniture maker, you'd see something that was symmetric, beautiful, functional, hadn't got all these bits hanging on to it and what have you. Now, there is something akin to that distinction in the way that that physicists think about their theories, because an ugly theory, so to speak, has lots of flexibility, lots of bits added on where you don't know what they're there for. It somehow looks like a lash up, but a beautiful theory is something that it's almost awesome to behold, because its parts fit together beautifully. There is characterized by symmetry. There are not that it looks inevitable the way it's put forward, and it's something that anyone with a basic understanding could see is concise, neatly expressed, and powerful in what it does. Another way of looking at it, incidentally, it's totally different, is a poem, whereby a beautiful poem, like one of the great Shakespeare sonnets, for example, has great concision and power and elegance by virtue of its economy. It's, the way it's pithily expressed in a few lines that can almost take off in our imagination because of its beautiful construction. Whereas a bad poem sprawls all over the place, lots of bad rhymes, its heart goes on too long, and it's got, words that don't quite scan and what have you. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
I mean, it's funny that you say that. I mean, I must admit, as somebody, I'm fairly non-artistic as well. I mean, I'm a terrible human being. I'm non-mathematical, non-artistic. And I just have my intuition somewhat says, well, if beauty is something, and I'm a great fan of Darwin, if beauty is a kind of an evolved biological function to kind of assess, say, genetic fitness, is there could the universe be ugly? Is it a requirement that the universe be beautiful, or that the underlying physics be beautiful? Is it a requirement?
Let me just go back to Dirac, who's the best. By far the best ambassador of the view I'm about to set forth, that Dirac believed that the most important thing about a fundamental theory in physics is that it is beautiful in the way I've described it. Now, you are absolutely right that is subjective, right? Dirac would deny this, but I think most people would say that it's in the eye of the beholder. That if you're not a mathematician or a physicist, you have no idea what that means when you look at the theory. And if you compare two theories, it tends to be subjective. Now, I say again, Dirac would deny that. He would say if you're a really good theoretician, we're straight away into subjectivity here, of course, but you know what a beautiful theory looks like. Now, whether the world is beautiful or not, that's a huge, very baggy question. But he's saying that when we try to describe reality as human beings see it, we make best progress with beautiful theories. That's what Dirac would have said for sure.
And that, when I was hearing you describe, Graham, when I was hearing you describe it particularly, and then linking it to the poetry, and it's this idea of something just seeming right. And I was wondering whether or not, you know, the idea of a beautiful theorem or one that has elegance is one where by having that quality, it's almost an assumption that you're closer to the so-called truth because there's nothing there that doesn't need to be there.
That's right.
And maybe that's one of the sense behind it.
That you've expressed it perfectly there. That's it.
I expressed something perfectly. Goodness me, Louie. Can we make a note of that? I expressed something perfectly.
You're beautiful.
It's only taken us about 45 or 50 episodes, but you know we're getting closer. But that's what I was hearing in terms of there is a rightness. It's close to the truth, and often when people do, and again as a lay observer of these things, you can get this idea. And I think maybe it's people like Stephen Hawking who have suggested that these kind of theories of everything should be ones that eventually are understood by a wider group rather than just people who would be able to spend the time making sense of the dense mathematics.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why those theories have value.
That's right. Hawking's one of many people who've said that. And it's right that if you look at you go to the frontiers of theoretical physics, what are those people doing? They're trying to understand the fundamental workings of nature as best we can. And we hope, or many of us hope, that eventually we will come up with a set of fundamental laws that describe nature. Another way of putting it is a set of concepts, equations that will give us the most economical, concise description of the universe, so that when you do your calculations, you predict it for every physical system. You get you get an answer that matches perfectly with experiment. That's what the aim is, and that's what theoreticians are doing.
And I want to go back then to Paul Dirac, then, to someone who spent time looking at the man's life and career and his approach and his contribution and so on. Now, the role of physics and the role of all these other kind of contributions to the kinds of questions we're interested in on the podcast, which is these kind of existential questions of no matter what background we have, no matter what our beliefs are, no matter what our knowledge is, we're faced with this kind of existence. And therefore we're kind of touching on these ideas of, well, the nature of the universe and why does it even exist in the first place? Is there a point to any of this? Yeah. You mentioned before then, because Louie asked about Dirac and him being, you might describe him as an atheist, at least as we would typically describe it. Yeah. What did you get a sense of then? Did he come to any kind of conclusion as in the point to any of it? Because sometimes when people come to as atheists, they might feel as though, well, and one of Louie's things here is that everything is pointless, and therefore, what do we do with that information? How do we live our lives?
If I could just jump in, I was going to say, I think one of the things, and having read the book, and I know Matthew hasn't read your book, Graham, but I mean, you do, I think, make Dirac a human being. You talk about his family, and you talk about, say, for example, his brother committing suicide. But I think also you make the argument that Dirac himself is strange, and maybe he isn't the same as everybody else. And I think right at the end of the book, you maybe talk about him having some kind of Asperger's or something. So, I mean, it's almost as if his strangeness helps him, look at the universe in a way that maybe we're more encumbered.
Yeah, well, all I would say on that is, whenever you talk about characters, you're into subjectivity again, of course. But I think from our perspective, our culture, his behaviour as a human being would for the great majority of people be classified as exceedingly odd. Now that doesn't make it bad or wrong, but it's unusual. And
can you give us some examples of that, Graham?
Oh, I could be here all day.
Just one or two of the more fun ones.
Just a few.
If I could say, Graham, you talked about him giving lectures in the same way because he'd already thought of the best way of describing things. And what was the point in changing your words if you've already?
Yes. Okay. Let me tell the story because you're. I just my first starter. I mean, I've met. It's quite funny when I've written a book like this. You always get people that come up to you and say, "Well, that's not right." People say, "No, he was actually quite talkative." Well, this is nonsense. He could on occasion be talkative if he's in the right company with close friends or family, and he's talking about his early life in Bristol, for example, or you're talking to one of his close friends in quantum mechanics. That is true. But for the great majority of time, he was very, very taciturn. I have met people that invited him for dinner, and he didn't say a single word during the whole evening, right from the moment he arrived to the moment he left. I've met people in his family who said that he would go an entire month without speaking. And that's not because he's sulking, but because he had nothing to say. Now, I submit that behavior, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm simply saying that if that happened in my family, among my friends, I would think that was exceedingly strange. Among physicists, stories of his singular behavior are legion. And one will suffice. I should say, when I started the book, I didn't believe this story, but after I'd finished it, I put my house on the fact that it's true, because the same or extremely similar behavior was shown at several different times and in several different places. The first instance was out of the Midwest in the late 1920s, when he was giving a talk, and he gave his normal hour-long presentation, and the chair of the session said, Professor Dirac, would you mind taking questions? And Dirac said, yes, that's fine. He said yes. And the chair said to the audience, are there any questions? And somebody put their hand up at the back of the auditorium and said, Professor Dirac, wonderful talk. I didn't understand that equation on the top right-hand blackboard. And anyway, sat down, and Dirac said absolutely nothing, and stood there for what I gather was 2 or 3 minutes, and people becoming increasingly restless and puzzled. And the chair, obviously embarrassed, turned to Dirac and said, would you please answer the question? And Dirac said it wasn't a question, it was a comment. And he did that, as I said, more than once, right? And there are, I won't give you any more examples, but I've met several people who've been on the wrong end, if you might put it that way, of that level of literal-mindedness, which was not done, I want to stress, to be clever or perverse. It was done because he was taking the literal meaning of question. And as far as he was concerned, that was the meaning that human beings have, and he would act upon it.
So what we're hearing is obviously very much about, what kind of person he was. And like I said, when I was hearing that, I was thinking, I can imagine a person sitting there thinking, well, it wasn't a question. But normally we might look at, okay, well, I'll point out that wasn't a question, but I think I'll either do my best to explain it or I'll leave it with you. But just by sitting there, you're saying he wasn't trying to do it to just make a point. He just said he realized it wasn't a question. There wasn't anything to respond to. Yeah, given that he's obviously of that nature, and that obviously is something which lends himself perhaps to being able to spend the time pondering on the kind of things he was pondering on. Did you get a sense then that would he have come to some conclusion as in the point of it all, or was he not interested in that? It was more just if his attempt is to literally understand the universe as it is, and matter, antimatter, and so on, it wasn't too concerned with the whys and wherefores. It was just, if I can better understand how things are, that's part of what I'm interested in. I'm not too concerned about then what that means. Is there a meaning to the universe? Again, were they questions he wasn't too concerned with? Yeah,
he was. I would say that, broadly speaking, he was not a philosophical thinker. Yes, you may think that the idea of mathematical beauty, which I've described to you, is philosophical. But as far as he had a pretty practical way of looking at it. What really interested Dirac was really quite simple. He wanted to find the set of rules, mathematical rules probably, right, that would, when you calculated them, they would give the closest possible description of nature. That's it. That's what interested him. right? Most other people, that includes me, I dare say it includes you, want to push it much further. Oh, is there a God involved here? What do we mean by reality? He wasn't interested in any of that stuff. Right? He had an engineer's attitude. Remember, he was trained as an engineer in Bristol, and he kept that, very straightforward, unphilosophical need to explain, get things right, right up to his dying day.
And on that note,
no, I think you really did a great job of telling the story, and I presume now, Graham, that you have, that you have some great fondness for Dirac, having spent so long writing about him and thinking about him. I'm sure. Would you say that's true?
Well, yes. I know. I obviously, having spent 6 years of my life studying him, you have a one has a fascination because he was a remarkable character. There's no doubt about that. And there's all sorts of things that spin off it, like the fact that many of the really great theoreticians now working regard him as, I would say, pretty much as much a role model as Einstein. If you talk to most people in the street, they'd probably have an idea who Einstein was. They had absolutely no idea who Dirac was, and instead Dirac would be quite happy about that. But for the professional theoreticians, they hold Dirac in extremely high esteem. Now, that's not. I have to say that I don't regard Dirac as great a human being as Einstein, because Einstein was a great humanitarian. And that, to me, makes him a much more substantial figure. But in terms of his achievements in physics, they are, I think, the only achievements that can be set alongside Einstein's in the 20th century, which is some going. I think you'll agree.
Sorry, carry on. Sorry.
That and his character make him a fascinating quarry for a biographer like myself.
And I guess, a question is, are we going to get, because it seems to me that physics is in somewhat of a morass at the moment. We haven't really got that same the feeling that quantum theory and in the 20s and 30s, actually it seemed to be discovering something new about the universe.
Well, I take your point, and I think broadly you're right, but I think the tone of your question is not right.
Right.
I'll tell you why that is. Yes, if you ask me to characterize fundamental physics at the moment, then I would say it's a bit of a mess. Now, hold on, let me be clear. It's one of the greatest structures that human beings have ever put down, right? And it explains a huge amount. But this is the glory of science. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And the answers to those questions at the moment are in a mess. Now, the best time to make your name in any science is to sort out a mess, right? That's why you could argue, and I bet when we're all dead, right, and people look back on 2017, they will say that X, Y, Z, these research groups did great work because they helped us sort out that mess. And to put it in a Diracian context, when he was a graduate student, he was looking at a mess. And he knew it was too. And it was his contribution and others that enabled that mess to get sorted out. So you could say that science advances from one mess to the next, so to speak. But we're in a mess now, and we need really good people to sort it out.
And do you suspect then that it's kind of grad students that may be on the scene now? It could be on the cusp of something about to happen, maybe, to start making sense of all this?
One of the themes of the book I'm currently writing is that very much in the spirit of what Dirac wanted, so far, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, which is the great atom smasher out there, which I'm visiting in a few weeks' time, they've done some wonderful, wonderful work, but they haven't discovered anything startling, with, you could say, the exception of a particle called the Higgs boson. You've probably heard of it, discovered in 2012. Now, that was a great achievement. Absolutely no question. A phenomenal achievement, not just for Peter Higgs and his colleagues who suggested the existence of that particle, but for the fantastic work of the physicists and engineers who enabled it to be detected. It's a very short-lived particle, but you can see it, and it's predicted on the nail by the fundamental theories of nature, which is a fantastic achievement. But, this is a big but, that all that effort has yielded nothing else that is fundamentally surprising as we speak. Now, if that continues, then particle accelerators are so expensive to make that we probably aren't going to get any more revelations about what's going on deep inside atoms for a good 10 or 20 years. So the only possibility that theoreticians have is by looking into the mathematics of the theory, not at experiment. And that's the theme of my next book.
And that's taking you to the Large Hadron Collider, is it? You're going to be there to...
I want to hear the great experimenters that have done such brilliant work. I want to hear what their thoughts are, because at the moment, things are looking disappointing in that, and I'm speaking in a almost a metaphorical way here, nature has been very disobliging, because we set up this fantastic accelerator, done this wonderful work, but we haven't come across as yet anything that is really surprising relative to theories that were established some 40 years ago.
And it will be interesting when you visit then to find out what they are, what is actually going on there then, what on a daily basis, what kind of things are being...
And there are going to be great people that sort that out. And it's very, to me, it's very exciting to be, it's a wonderful, wonderful time to be a young person, because, to use a familiar image, you remember how Einstein came along in 1905 and gave all the Brahmin of theoretical physics a comprehensive physics lesson in 3 papers, right? Now, maybe that's going to happen again. It's unlikely, but it may happen again, right? That was a classic example of a complete mess that he sorted out.
And it's great to hear in your voice how, you genuinely excited you feel by that we're on that place where there's stuff perhaps to be sorted out, and it's about to happen. The working title of your book, when we look out for this?
Yeah, got a full working title, but it's going to be about the great thought experiment that theoreticians are doing to sort out the nature of the universe. And it's an amazing thing. To me, it's the most surprising thing in the whole of science, pretty much, I have to say, that mathematics fits so well into nature. It's not at all obvious that mathematics describes in nature so well, and that's the thing that very good company, way out of my league, but Dirac and Einstein both had a very similar view of this amazing ability for mathematics to work when applied to nature.
And it sounds well. I was going to say, and it makes me very sad in a way that I absolutely hated mathematics as a child, and therefore, it's kind of lost on me a little bit. And it always one of the things I always think it's quite sad that, I look at maths and I honestly, as much as I try, it means nothing. But
I know, but read my next book and you'll have at least a handle on it. I mean, sure. It's true that most people, the mathematical level of physicists these days is way higher than Einstein ever dreamed of. That needs to be said. Remember, I was just writing about this the other day, that Einstein was not a great mathematician. He was a fantastically good physicist, and he worked like a dog to try to master mathematics that he found very difficult. I mean, you find it difficult. He also found it difficult, and it's to his enormous credit that he by the sheer sweat and perseverance, he managed to pull off a new theory of gravity. Well, now today, the people at the forefront are much better at mathematics than he was. But that's not to say, of course, they're better physicists. But that's his legacy of showing us the need to build these muscles, if you like, of a mathematical ability if you're to understand physics better.
And I'm assuming again, as another non-mathematician, in terms of not something I've studied formally, and a bit like Louie, in terms of you can make sense of it up to a point in the context of for example, some of the psychological work we may have been involved with. Mm-hmm. But there is you get the sense of maybe there's going to be, do you think maybe like a Paul Dirac out there who's about to make that same kind of breakthrough? And is it also because mathematics itself has evolved so much over the last...
I'd say that really is an invitation too far. That's a bit like saying, is there another Picasso? Is there another Jane Austen? We just don't know. Or
at least someone who's willing to kind of, or is needing to go beyond, what we kind of currently can observe and see and experiment, and it requires that kind of theoretical jump.
There is, but be careful. I would say that be careful of always wanting to be having the Messiah complex of expecting one person to do it all. And the classic thing there is, yes, Einstein was an absolutely brilliant scientist. That no serious person can deny that, right? But you take something like quantum mechanics, he was one of about 20 people who worked on that theory, right? And even Darwin, who was a great, great figure, he wasn't the only person who worked on that theory. I mean, we tend, and I can be guilty of this sometimes, to look for great stars to come down on a winged chariot and sort everything out. In the end, it will be the scientific community that does it, not one person.
And I guess, Graham, if we're kind of wrapping up this episode, then can we ask your personal, if we were talking about Dirac being an atheist? I mean, I always like to ask our guests, the very personal question about their own beliefs. Have you got any? I mean, would you describe yourself as an atheist if that's not an?
Well, I would take the normal liberal with a small L cop out of saying I don't see any logical reason or any to introduce the hypothesis of a God. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I don't, that I don't have morality or that I don't have a fascination with the nature of the world. Again, I have to say, I perhaps rather slavishly follow Einstein and Dirac. That what really moves me to wonder that is you might call it a quasi-religious feeling, is this amazing harmony between mathematics and the way that can be used to understand the universe. That is a constant source of awe to me, and that moves me in the same way as that others might be moved by a beautiful landscape or even love of another human being in some sense, because it is something that is transcendent and deeply emotionally moving. So I'm not a believer in what you might call a straightforward believer in a superior being for sure, but I do believe in the wonder of the harmony of the universe.
I've got a feeling, Louie, then we're going to have to start brushing up on our mathematics a little bit. I don't think there's any point there whatsoever. I am terrible, absolutely crap at it. But what should we say? Thank you, Graham, for your time, and your, any listeners, please go and read Graham's book because they're absolutely, fascinating.
Well, don't forget to name them. The Strangest Man is my biography of Paul Dirac, and my book on Churchill is Churchill's Bomb,
which I have started, and it's fascinating stuff already. I didn't manage to finish it, I'm afraid.
So maybe then, Graham, whilst we won't necessarily hold you to it, perhaps you'll come back and join us and we can talk more about that one on a future episode?
Why not?
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yes,
really appreciate it.
Enjoyed talking
to you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye for now.